The silver carry-on never stood a chance, not because it was too big or too heavy, but because the man holding it didn't look like he should be in first class. At Gate 7 of Concordia Regional Airport, one moment shattered the illusion of progress. Darius Langston, CEO of a billion-dollar defense tech firm, stood perfectly still as a junior gate agent stared him down and said the words that would bring an entire airline to its knees. "That bag's not getting on my plane, and neither are you." No one knew what was inside that sleek aluminum case, classified government tech, worth more than the entire flight manifest combined. But what mattered more was the insult. Within 10 minutes, boarding for flight M218 stopped. Within the hour, the route was canceled. And by day's end, an entire system of silent discrimination would begin to unravel. Darius didn't shout, he didn't argue. He made a call, and that call rewrote the future of air travel forever. If you believe no black man should ever be disrespected for how he looks or what he carries, then prove it. Subscribe right now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The morning sun had just begun to crest the hills surrounding Concordia Regional Airport. A chill lingered in the spring air, the kind that made people move faster, shoulders hunched, coffee cups steaming. But Darius Langston moved differently. Where others rushed, he glided. Where others looked around nervously, he moved with surgical calm. The black town car slowed to a stop outside the executive terminal. The chauffeur stepped out to open the rear door with silent precision. Darius emerged, one hand tucked in his coat pocket, the other grasping the gleaming silver carry-on that would change the fate of an entire airline. He didn't wear flash, just authority. Navy trench coat, tailored slacks, the subtle glint of a rose gold watch under his cuff. Every step he took echoed on the polished concrete, a metronome of quiet dominance. The terminal doors slid open automatically, almost deferentially. Inside, the hum of morning activity barely touched him. The scent of espresso, the muted announcements, the nervous chatter of commuters, they formed a backdrop. He was focused. He had just wrapped 4 days at a classified research facility in the Rockies, where his company had finalized prototype modules for an AI-driven missile defense network. The components still in beta were nestled within that carry-on under layers of biometric locks, shock-proof casing, and government tags. It was more than luggage, it was trust, security, future. Gate 7 was already buzzing. A boarding agent in a tight maroon tie stood at the counter, flipping between screens with mechanical boredom. Darius approached with a steady calm, stopping exactly 2 feet from the podium. Boarding pass, the agent asked without looking up. Darius presented both his digital pass and the special clearance barcode for the carry-on approved weeks prior by Ascenda Air's Defense Logistics Division. A gray tag exemption. It should have been automatic, but the agent's eyes narrowed when they flicked upward. They lingered, not on the badge, not on the pass, not on the clearance, on Darius. Then came the pause. That moment of internal calculation when bias sneaks in through the back door of professionalism. "I'm sorry, sir. That bag's oversized." Darius didn't flinch. "It's been pre-cleared. Scan the gray tag." The agent, his name badge read N. Barrett didn't even glance at the barcode. "Doesn't matter. Oversized is oversized. You'll have to check it." Darius raised an eyebrow. "It contains defense-grade equipment. That bag doesn't leave my line of sight." Barrett smirked slightly. "Then I guess you're not flying today." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A few heads turned. A businessman sipping coffee stopped mid-sip. A teenage girl's eyes darted up from her phone. Darius held his composure. He wasn't new to this. He was used to assumptions: too young to be CEO, too calm to be in charge, too black to be both. He pulled out his phone, opened the Langston Dynamics travel suite, and brought up the signed exemption letter from Ascenda Air's security chief. It was time-stamped, sealed, and backed by federal contract protocols. Barrett didn't bother reading it. "You can take a picture of your luggage if you want, but it's not getting on board." Behind him, a security guard appeared, not aggressively yet, but with that all-too-familiar readiness that said, "We're not here to protect you." Darius took a slow breath, locked eyes with the guard, then looked back at Barrett. "Page 14 of your own internal manual details. Gray tag protocol," he said calmly. "This carry-on qualifies. You are now in violation." Barrett's smirk faded. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you." More passengers were noticing now. A murmur spread. A man in line muttered to his wife, That's Darius Langston. Isn't he the guy from Langston Dynamics? Someone else whispered. Isn't that the company building the new air defense grid? Barrett seemed oblivious. Maybe he'd never read a headline beyond the sports section. Maybe he just didn't care. Look, he said, waving his hand dismissively. You're holding up the line. Either check the bag or step aside. Darius didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he opened a secure communication tab on his phone, tapped a single button and said, Activate terminal protocol. Gate 7, cargo manifest lock. Begin compliance audit. A quiet ping confirmed the order. Barrett blinked. What did you just do? Darius finally smiled. Just slightly. You'll find out soon. The silver carry-on still sat quietly by his side, gleaming, untouched, waiting. So was Darius, because this wasn't about a bag anymore. It was about a system, and the clock had just started ticking. Barrett returned to the boarding counter like nothing had happened, issuing robotic instructions to the next passenger as if he hadn't just denied one of the most powerful men in the country access to the plane. The tension from the confrontation clung to the air like static. Darius hadn't moved for sure from where he stood, calm, collected, a man of silence but infinite weight. The carry-on remained upright beside him like an exclamation point. Passengers began to notice. Not just the confrontation, but the energy. One woman in line murmured, That's the Langston guy, the defense contracts guy. A man behind her tapped something urgently into his phone. The boarding lounge was now quietly charged. People who once pretended not to care were now watching every micro-expression. Barrett noticed too, but he pretended not to, still smug. Still in control, or so he believed. 10 minutes passed, then the first anomaly. The gate's digital boarding screen flickered once then again before freezing on a blank blue display. Barrett frowned and tapped the screen. It didn't respond. Behind the counter, his co-agent leaned closer, whispering, Systems frozen. Barrett shook his head. It's just lag. But the intercom beeped sharply and then went dead. The PA silence was deafening. The hush spread. At the far end of the terminal, a junior IT tech in an Ascenda Air hoodie stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, face pale. They just blocked our cargo system, he whispered urgently into the line. Some kind of lockdown. Meanwhile, across the terminal in the glass-walled executive lounge, Darius sat alone, serene. His phone lay beside him, blinking with activity. His fingers moved with deliberate precision, pulling up a rotating 3D schematic of Flight M218's cargo hold and passenger manifest. Secure the payload, he said into his Bluetooth mic. Begin internal trace. Flag all override instances from Gate 7. His head of logistics responded instantly. Affirmative. Surveillance uplinks engaged. Internal audit launched. Barrett's override logs already pulling. Darius leaned back. No bluster, no shouting, just execution. Barrett, still at the counter, tapped the boarding panel again harder. The interface blinked, then glitched, then died. His smile cracked. Passengers began shifting, annoyed but alert. What's going on? A man near the front of the line asked. Why aren't we boarding? I'll check. Barrett muttered, turning toward the glass-walled supervisor station nearby. Inside, security feed monitors displayed a silent loop Darius, standing at the counter, silver case in hand, being denied access. The video had already been flagged and saved under an internal case file by Langston's shadow team. The system Barrett had dismissed as just a bag issue was now watching him. Meanwhile, Langston Dynamics specialists across the city had already tapped into the emergency override clause, buried deep in Ascenda Air's infrastructure agreement, Clause 91E, a dormant provision granting Langston full audit and operational intervention privileges in cases involving government-registered equipment or personnel. It had never been triggered before, until now. Across town, in a private, soundproof boardroom on the 32nd floor of Ascenda's headquarters, a red notification pulsed on the screen. Clause 91E active. The board of directors stared at it in disbelief. One murmured, "What's that clause even for?" The general counsel answered dryly, "The clause we all forgot we signed." By the time the boardroom silence had settled into dread, it was already too late. Langston's team had launched a full-scale systems audit on Gate 7's activity, including Barrett's terminal usage history, override refusals, and recorded discrepancies. The footage was clean, crisp, time-stamped, and damning. Back at the airport, Barrett reemerged from the supervisor station, face-pale lips pressed thin. He tapped his tablet again, then froze. The screen flashed a single message. In red, flight M218 canceled. He blinked. No, 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 no. That's not possible, he whispered. The terminal's public display updated moments later with a harsh chime. A bold red banner scrolled across the board. Flight canceled. Contact customer service. Gasps echoed across the lounge. What? No way, what happened? This was a direct flight. There's no weather. Passengers looked around for answers and their eyes slowly locked onto Darius Langston. Still seated, still composed. Someone whispered he did this. Barrett stormed over, fists clenched, face red. You think you can cancel a flight over a bag? Darius rose slowly, meeting him eye to eye. No, he said calmly. I canceled the route. Barrett's mouth parted. But Darius wasn't done. You mocked your system, ignored protocol. You dismissed verified credentials because you didn't like who presented them. This was never about a bag. Barrett sputtered. You don't have that kind of power. Behind him, the PA system rebooted, announcing the suspension of the M218 route. An automatic email fired out to all booked passengers with rebooking details. Corporate damage control had begun, but the wound had already opened. You denied more than clearance today, Darius said. You denied dignity. And now your entire operation is paying the price. As Barrett stood stunned, a uniformed officer approached from the terminal's private corridor. Mr. Langston, the officer said with quiet deference, your aircraft is ready. Private hangar, east runway. Darius didn't even look back at Barrett as he collected his bag, because gatekeepers should always remember who built the gate. Darius Langston stood still at Gate 7, the hum of Concordia Regional Airport fading beneath a storm of rising tension. Around him, passengers moved slowly, their movements syncing with the subtle shift in the air. It wasn't just the delay. It was something deeper, an unspoken recognition that something unusual was unfolding. Darius, impeccably dressed and commanding without effort, held his ground as if the floor itself deferred to him. Across the counter, Nathan Barrett, the boarding agent, tapped his fingers on the desk with artificial calm. The silver carry-on sat between them like a silent witness, sleek, sealed, and gleaming with authority. It wasn't just luggage. It was the vault of Darius's next billion-dollar proposal, the vessel holding classified defense modules that had been cleared through layers of approval. I need you to scan the tag, Darius said evenly, pointing to the matte gray clearance sticker affixed near the handle. Barrett didn't move. He scoffed, eyes narrowing in a mixture of challenge and defiance. Oversized is oversized. Pre-approval or not, you're checking it or walking away. Darius didn't flinch. He unlocked his phone with a T and pulled up a secured app, Langston Dynamics Travel Suite. On screen, a rotating security seal blinked, Ascenda Priority Gray. Embedded in the clearance were names, digital timestamps, and a biometric clearance code authorized by Ascenda's own logistics director. Barrett gave the phone one passing glance and sneered. I don't care what app you're running. Maybe next time get a bag that fits like the rest of us, the rest of us. The phrase hung in the air like acid mist. A few feet away, a mother with a toddler tugged her child closer. A businessman shifted uncomfortably in his leather shoes. Whispers rose like static behind phones pretending to text, but quietly recording. There was no scene, just the feeling of one about to erupt. Page 14 of your airline's internal logistics manual outlines the gray tag exemption protocol, Darius said, tone still neutral, voice low but firm. It explicitly states government classified cargo that cannot be separated from the principal carrier is to be exempt from weight and size restrictions. Barrett leaned back, arms folded. That's not my concern. I'm not scanning anything just because you said so. At that moment, a uniformed security officer approached. His nameplate read A. Calderon. Tall, built like a defensive lineman, his face was unreadable. Problem here, he asked, glancing at both men. No problem, Barrett answered too quickly. Just a passenger refusing to follow procedure. This passenger, Darius said without raising his voice, is operating on a secured timeline involving government property. This is not a personal trip. This is a national defense contract in motion. Calderon looked toward the bag, then at the app screen still glowing in Darius's hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but Barrett cut in. We've got standard rules. We're not making exceptions just because someone walks in with a suit and attitude. Darius blinked slowly. This wasn't about a bag anymore. This was about protocol being weaponized by someone too small to wield it. Behind them, the crowd was growing. Not physically, just in awareness. More eyes watched now. Phones angled subtly. Some passengers paused in line. Others leaned closer to the gate's digital board as if pretending to check flight updates. But the air was different. Power didn't shout. It vibrated. And Darius knew how to make the room feel it. With silent precision, he pressed another icon on his phone. The screen flashed red for 3 seconds, an internal escalation ping sent directly to Langston Dynamics' shadow team. A quiet alert now pulsed through a private network across multiple cities. In a downtown tech hub 3 states away, a team of data analysts saw it. Inside Ascenda's own infrastructure system, hidden under Langston's IT subcontract, a fail-safe script came alive. Code lines blinked. The system began pulling audit logs from Gate 7. But in the terminal, all was still calm. "You're escalating something simple," Barrett said, his voice rising just slightly, trying to hold on to the illusion of control. "I'm giving you a choice check, bag or leave the gate." Darius looked past him. Behind the counter, the boarding screen flickered not to the public but on Barrett's own system. 3 override prompts had been sent in the past 12 minutes. 3 gray tag authorization pings had gone ignored. "You ignored your system," Darius said, stepping slightly closer. "Now you've escalated this beyond you." Barrett bristled. "I don't care who you think you are." Darius's voice dropped into something deeper, colder. "I'm not here for validation. I'm here to meet a contract deadline. One you've just jeopardized." Calderon, sensing the mounting tension, stepped forward. "Sir," he said to Barrett, "maybe we should call upstairs. Let them confirm the clearance." Barrett hesitated. Darius saw it, the flicker of uncertainty, the split-second fear behind the smirk. Too late. Darius's phone buzzed. A message glowed on the screen. "Flag confirmed. Activating Clause 91E. Langston Operations Core." Darius didn't smile. He simply looked at Barrett and said, "You just lost more than control of this gate." And with that, he turned and walked away. Silver bag rolling behind him. Silence following like thunderclouds before a storm. The security officer Calderon had barely blinked when Barrett declared, "We may need to escort this man." But the words hung in the air like an accusation rather than a protocol, a public spectacle wrapped in procedural jargon. Calderon stood with the discipline of a man trained to de-escalate, not inflame. Yet even he could sense the shift in energy around Gate 7. Darius didn't move, didn't blink. His silver carry-on rested quietly by his feet, a sharp contrast to the rising noise around him. Passengers now stopped pretending not to notice. A murmur ran through the waiting crowd, some filming, subtly others whispering theories about who this man might be or why an airline agent seemed so determined to prove a point. "I'm going to ask you again, sir," Barrett said louder this time. "Step aside and check the bag." Darius turned toward him slowly, and for the first time his voice lost its marble-smooth tone. It wasn't angry, it was surgical. "You've ignored 3 override prompts. You've disregarded a gray tag classification logged into your system, and now you're threatening to remove a government contractor in possession of national defense prototypes." A pause. Barrett swallowed but didn't retreat. "You could have said all that earlier." "I did," Darius replied. "You weren't listening. You were asserting authority." At that moment, Calderon stepped between them. "Let's verify the documentation," he offered neutrally. Barrett snapped, "We don't need verification. The bag is oversized, and that's all that matters." "Actually," Calderon countered calmly, "if the passenger claims government clearance, we do. Protocol requires it." Barrett froze, his authority slipping. His jaw clenched, as if holding back a scream. Across the terminal, the Langston Dynamics team had already begun remote diagnostics. From an anonymous terminal in a neighboring city, Darius's operations analyst authenticated Clause 91B, an embedded override built into Ascenda Air's logistics agreement, allowing emergency response access to any gate with Langston-controlled data. Gate 7 was one such gate. Back at the lounge, the Langston Dynamics app lit up. A clearance override appeared in red. Darius didn't even glance at his phone. The network was already doing its job. The tension at Gate 7 was now visible. Even Calderon shifted slightly, sensing the tide turn. Passengers nearby whispered to each other, and more phones came out, some now openly recording. A story was brewing, and they could feel it. Barrett tried once more, his voice brittle. This is ridiculous. It's a bag. No, Darius replied. It's a test. Barrett blinked. A test of whether the system you serve can recognize power when it's quiet, when it's not loud or white or dressed in expectation. I didn't shout. I didn't demand. I followed your protocols. You failed them. Barrett stepped back. For a moment, the flurry of adrenaline in his chest threatened to give way to panic. He looked at Calderon, expecting backup, but Calderon stayed silent, neutral, watching. Darius finally moved not toward the gate, but toward a private lounge area behind security. As he walked, the hallway parted like the sea. Executives, agents, passengers all stepped aside. In that quiet retreat, he made one call. Activate internal protocol, he said. Within seconds, Langston Dynamics' audit team accessed gate logs, camera feeds, override prompts, and Barrett's full personnel history. What they found made Darius pause. 3 incidents in the past 6 months, all at Gate 7, all involving passengers of color, all denied boarding by Barrett, 2 filed complaints. One involved a disabled vet asked to remove prosthetics during a routine search. The other, a mother with 2 children, refused priority boarding because her ticket seemed forged. Barrett had a pattern, and now it was on paper. The oversight team pushed the data packet to Ascenda Air's HQ, and across town in a sleek glass-paneled boardroom, red alerts began blinking on Ascenda's internal compliance screens. Meanwhile, Barrett returned to his post rattled, but pretending otherwise. He smoothed his tie, tapped his screen, and resumed boarding the remaining passengers. But the gate monitor glitched. Once, twice. Then it froze. Flight M218 canceled. The crowd gasped. Barrett stared at the screen. What the he muttered, fingers jabbing at the unresponsive touchscreen. From the lounge window, Darius watched the panic unfold. His phone buzzed again. Route M218 suspension confirmed. He closed the phone, stood, picked up his silver carry-on, and began walking calm, composed, deliberate toward the exit, but not before whispering to no one in particular. When gatekeepers forget who built the gate, systems collapse. The message hit Ascenda Air headquarters like a bomb. Clause 91E, invoked emergency override protocol initiated. The words flashed in crimson across every executive dashboard on the 32nd floor of the Ascenda Tower, located in the heart of Atrian City. Within minutes, senior board members, legal counsel, and security heads were ushered into a glass-walled war room. Phones silenced, eyes locked onto the screen, where the data packet sent from Langston Dynamics played in chilling sequence. Footage from Gate 7, override prompts ignored. Government-cleared prototype flagged as oversized. Gate agent Nathan Barrett. CEO Harold Wynn leaned forward, his knuckles white against the conference table. You mean to tell me Langston's people flagged this in real time before we even had eyes on it? General Counsel Lawrence Easton nodded grimly. They had monitoring rights, built into the infrastructure deal from 3 years ago, buried deep in the modernization agreement. Gate 7 is powered by Langston's secure data systems. Clause 91E gives them the right to halt operations for national security breaches, personnel misconduct, and interference with government freight. So we're liable, another board member whispered. Barry Easton confirmed. And it's not just about the bag anymore. It's about the agent, the pattern, and the optics. Across the table, COO Malcolm Tate was seething. Who let that agent override a federal clearance? That's not just a policy violation. That's a trigger for a lawsuit. We have a bigger problem, said Easton. Langston didn't call first. He didn't file a complaint. He pulled the trigger and canceled the route. The room fell silent. Across town in a soundproof Langston Dynamics conference room, Darius sat calmly, his carry-on beside him, as his audit team compiled a report in real time. The data was irrefutable. Ascenda Air had not only failed to protect a priority passenger, they had cultivated a pattern of institutional neglect. 3 incidents in 6 months, all at Gate 7, all involving passengers of color, all involving Nathan Barrett. One case included footage of a teenage boy being pulled aside and interrogated without cause. The agent had smirked through it. The boy missed his flight to attend a scholarship interview. Another involved an elderly black professor detained because her laptop bag was unusual in shape. The professor had filed a quiet complaint. It was closed with no follow-up. Now every one of those incidents had resurfaced. Darius wasn't just compiling grievances, he was building a dossier for institutional reckoning. Back at Ascenda HQ, Wynn ran a hand down his face. "We need to contain this, before it spirals." "It's too late," said Tate, scrolling through social media feeds on his phone. Gate 7's already trending. Someone posted a clip of Barrett calling Langston "this man." The comment section is exploding. "And the flight cancellation?" asked Wynn. "Passengers are posting," Tate muttered. "People are speculating everything from racism to security threats. But no one's buying the official line of logistics error." Easton stood, flipping his tablet around to display the override logs. "We have two options. Accept Langston's full audit and suspend all M-Series gate staff immediately. Or go to court and watch this turn into a federal case involving discrimination, breach of infrastructure protocols, and sabotage of a defense contractor's transit." "You think he'll sue?" Wynn asked. "No," Easton said. "I think he'll reform the industry." At that exact moment inside Langston's digital lab, an executive tapped into a secured channel. "We've completed the cross-reference," she said to Darius. Barrett overrode 3 federal tags. His screen flashed red, prompting him to escalate clearance. He dismissed it manually. Twice. "And the cargo logs?" Darius asked. "Tampered with," she replied. "Files were deleted within 5 minutes of the denial. We recovered the timestamps." "There's clear intent." Darius's face didn't flinch. "Send it to the compliance watchdog, full exposure." Then he stood and moved to the glass wall overlooking the city skyline. For a moment, he let the silence stretch. Outside, traffic crawled. Planes cut silently across the clouds. Systems moved oblivious to the men trying to control them. "I didn't want to make an example," he said finally. "But sometimes you don't choose the battlefield. It chooses you." His executive team remained silent. He turned, eyes clear. "Prepare the memo." In less than 10 minutes, Langston Dynamics transmitted an executive summary to federal oversight bodies, key stakeholders, and Ascenda's partner investors. It included video clips, override logs, deleted files, and Barrett's personnel history. The subject line read, "Gate 7 Pattern Recognition Request for Structural Compliance Review." Inside, Ascenda, panic turned into action. Legal teams mobilized. PR agents scrambled for talking points. But the foundation had already cracked. Investors began pulling queries. Stock monitoring alerts pinged in succession. And through it all, Darius remained still. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reshaping an entire infrastructure one denial at a time. The ripple effect wasn't a ripple anymore. It was a tidal wave. The morning after the M218 route was suspended, the story had exploded. Every major news outlet, Global Business Today, Aeroscope, and even entertainment tabloids had one thing in common: the same 3 words plastered across their homepages. "Route canceled mid-terminal." And beneath that headline was the face of Darius Langston, caught in a still frame, calm as ever, silver carry-on in hand, walking away from Gate 7 like a man who just signed a declaration not of war but of consequence. By 8:00 a.m., hashtags were trending: Gate 7 Truth Respect, the tag Langston. Line drawn inside Ascenda's internal servers, things were worse. The full Langston audit had arrived at 6:43 a.m. 71 pages of personnel violations, logistics overrides, and confirmed systemic negligence tied directly to one department in one gate, Gate 7. Nathan Barrett's name appeared 19 times. The audit wasn't just damning, it was surgical. 3 former Ascenda employees who had quietly resigned over hostile team dynamics were also named in footnotes. Each had filed internal reports that went nowhere. One had been ignored. The other 2 had mysteriously vanished after being tagged low priority. Now, under Darius Langston's legal request, those cases had resurfaced and been forwarded to federal regulators. At 10:32 a.m., a bombshell dropped. The FAA opened a review. Ascenda's general counsel practically sprinted to the office of CEO Harold Wynn. "We're under full compliance investigation," he said, eyes wide. "They're citing Title 49, Section 41712. Unfair practices, discriminatory conduct. This is spiraling." Wynn slammed his palm against the desk. "It was a damn bag." "No," the counsel snapped. "It was a bag full of classified defense prototypes registered through a cleared channel and manually denied for no valid reason. You let a petty gate agent override that clearance on video. And worse, you ignored Langston's contractual rights." Across town, Darius Langston sat in a quiet glass-walled lounge above the city. A single tablet on the table displayed multiple live feeds, news interviews, public commentary, financial stock tickers. Ascenda's value had dropped 4.7% overnight. He wasn't watching the numbers, though. He was listening to the passengers. A young woman in Chicago posted a TikTok. I saw it happen at Gate 7 3 months ago. I asked a question and the agent looked me up and down before saying, "We don't handle complaints about tone." I walked away crying. But now someone finally fought back. Another post came from a father in Atlanta. "They delayed our flight because my son's wheelchair didn't fit their specs." "My son's legs don't bend like yours," I said. Barrett laughed and said, "Then maybe this airline isn't for you." That man, Darius Langston, just gave us all a voice. Darius closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in slowly. The stories weren't new. They were just finally being heard. Then came the internal leak that shattered any remaining defenses Ascenda had. A former vice president of operations, now retired, released a confidential memo from 4 years earlier. It was damning. The memo warned about Nathan Barrett specifically. It listed red flags from his onboarding process: rigid behavior under pressure, disregard for escalation protocols, and inappropriate interactions with passengers during training. The memo had been filed and ignored. Worse, Barrett's hiring had been pushed through by a personal referral from the then director of gate operations. That director had since risen to a senior executive role. The internet exploded. Darius read the memo twice. He didn't need to read it again. "Send it to the ethics committee," he told his chief legal officer, "and CC the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Office. Make it public." The next headline read, "Memo ignored, airline knew Gate 7 agent was a risk." Inside, Ascenda HQ chairs were emptying. 4 executives resigned in 36 hours. Nathan Barrett had been placed on indefinite leave, but the announcement was buried in a 2-line email, an act that only inflamed the public further. Meanwhile, Darius was already moving on his next step: the Langston Transit Equity Initiative, an all-new platform designed to monitor gate and security staff behavior in real time using AI sentiment tracking, behavioral pattern mapping, and biometric authentication. The software could detect tone shifts, microaggressions, and procedural inconsistencies in under a second. It wouldn't just flag discriminatory behavior. It would prove it. Back at Gate 7, crews were already beginning renovations. The signage was removed, the space stripped to the studs. Langston Dynamics had assumed joint operational control. What used to be a standard boarding gate would become the Langston Experience Center, a live case study in bias-free tech-driven transit. Darius visited in secret. He stood beneath the raw beams surrounded by silence and dust. A foreman approached. "Mr. Langston, you want the plaque mounted before inspection?" Darius paused. "What plaque?" The man lifted a square of steel from a box. On it were 5 words etched clean and deep: "Respect begins before takeoff." Darius looked at it for a long moment. Then he nodded. As the final bolts were driven into place at Gate 7, the world watched a quiet transformation unfold, not just of a space, but of an idea. No more was it merely a portal to departure gates and destinations. Gate 7 had become something else entirely, a monument to accountability. Ascenda Air had no choice but to cooperate. The internal hemorrhaging was too severe to ignore. Employee whistleblower protections were hastily updated. Emergency board meetings were scheduled daily. PR firms rotated by the hour. But Darius Langston wasn't interested in damage control. He was interested in infrastructure reform. Inside a sleek downtown tower, he sat with his core executive team diagrams and code filling the screens around them. His voice was low, direct, deliberate. "Surveillance isn't about punishment. It's about protection," he said. "If they're afraid of being watched, good. Maybe it'll stop them from turning policy into prejudice." Langston Dynamics' behavioral AI suite, already nicknamed Sentinel, was now being tested across 3 additional airports. It measured inflection, hesitation, facial tension, and scanned for procedural discrepancies during passenger interactions. The data was clear. Over 32% of incidents flagged involved passengers of color being subjected to extra scrutiny without cause. Every metric Darius had suspected was now proven, and the public was watching. "Sentinel's going nationwide," his CTO declared. "And after that, global." Darius didn't flinch. "Then make sure the ethics team scales faster than the servers. While the tech initiative moved forward, another storm brewed behind the scenes. In a conference room 15 stories above ground, the board of Ascenda sat like statues around a walnut table. A new headline had just gone viral. FAA investigation finds pattern of discriminatory boarding practices at Gate 7. It cited 6 years of data, repeated violations, at least 3 previously buried settlements, every single one involving gate agent Nathan Barrett or someone he trained. Barrett, once untouchable, had now been reduced to a symbol of neglect, of arrogance, of what happens when systems rot from within. Ascenda's CEO Harold Wynn knew the weight of that symbol. "We were warned," he whispered to the room, voice low and broken. "We knew, and we did nothing." Silence followed. Then came the pivot point. An external compliance consultant hired under duress presented her findings. The entire M-Series gate operation showed signs of toxic culture clusters. Racially coded directives, biased profiling algorithms in check-in terminals, and worst of all, training manuals that omitted key federal non-discrimination protocols. "This isn't just about gate agents," the consultant said grimly. "This is a structural failure." Her words struck hard, so hard in fact that a junior board member stood up and without permission asked the unthinkable, "Should we let Langston acquire a controlling stake?" Gasps rippled through the room. No one said immediately, "We'd lose the company. We already have," someone muttered. Back in Langston Tower, Darius received a coded message through his secure network. Ascenda board considering equity negotiation. He read it in silence, then turned to the wall behind him where a large digital display showed Gate 7's current progress. The beams were up, new signage being printed. The custom desks equipped with behavioral monitoring tools were already installed. His vision was no longer theoretical, it was physical. And yet something gnawed at him. A question. Had this really changed anything, or had it just shifted the battlefield? To find out, Darius made an unannounced visit to Concord Regional Airport that afternoon. No press, no escort, just him in a gray sweater and jeans walking among the crowd like any other traveler. He approached Gate 7, now labeled LD7 on the digital board, and watched the new agents at work. A black mother with 2 children approached with a stroller and an overpacked tote. The agent smiled. "No worries, ma'am. Let me help tag that for you, priority scan included. Right this way." No sigh, no suspicion, no shade, just respect. Darius stood still, unseen in the background. No one recognized him. That's how he wanted it. Nearby, a teenager with a camera slung over his shoulder whispered to his friend, "You know this gate used to be cursed, right? But now it's like sponsored by that billionaire guy, the one who shut the route down." His friend looked around. Good. About time someone cleaned house. Darius turned and walked away. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. Across the city, in a cramped apartment filled with news clippings and blinking monitors, Nathan Barrett sat hunched over a cracked phone. His career was in ruins. His apology video had been torn apart online, his words dismissed as performative. He still couldn't comprehend how it all unraveled so fast. "It was just a bag," he muttered to himself. But even now he didn't get it. It was never about the bag. It was about everything the bag represented. The silent decisions, the microaggressions, the invisible lines drawn at airports, banks, and boardrooms. And Darius Langston. He didn't just challenge it, he erased it, one route at a time. The walls of Langston Dynamics' situation room were bathed in soft electric blue. A sprawling multi-panel dashboard pulsed with real-time analytics, incident flags, sentiment tracking from terminals. News mentioned social media activity. Every variable tracked, every moment documented. Sajid. Darius Langston stood alone before the screens, his reflection ghosted over the live data. He wasn't looking for validation. He was scanning for the truth. Not the truth from Barrett or Ascenda or even the passengers, but the system's truth. Bias had always hidden in subtleties: the raised brow at check-in, the unnecessary rescan at security, the random bag check that was never really random. He'd spent a lifetime feeling them like cracks in polished marble, barely visible but always threatening collapse. Now the system couldn't hide anymore. LD Gate network integrity, 97.3%, the dashboard read. Not perfect, but measurable. Progress had a number now, and yet Darius knew change wasn't just about metrics. It was about memory, what people remember when they feel powerless, what they carry long after the flight has landed. He closed the terminal quietly. Elsewhere in the building, two interns sat at their desks, whispering over a news headline. CEO who canceled route over, bag now. Redefining airline policy nationwide. While one of them said, but they never thought he'd go this far. The other nodded. Honestly, I don't think he did. And they were right. Darius hadn't planned to launch a movement. He just wanted to board a flight, make a critical presentation, and protect a contract. He didn't want a war. But wars often start when dignity is denied in silence. And now the system was listening. Across town, in the cold steel nerve center of Ascenda Air headquarters, something new was unfolding. An ethics audit team, external, impartial, relentless, was reviewing footage from over 400 gates across the country. One by one, patterns emerged. Just like Gate 7, names, incidents, policies misapplied. A whiteboard filled with colored magnets, green for cleared agents, red for escalated review. Too many reds. An executive assistant entered the audit chamber with a sealed file. Special review requested by Langston Dynamics per contract clause. Inside a stack of internal emails. One thread in particular stood out. Barrett had joked about the exemption system. Gray tags just mean rich guys who think rules don't apply to them, he had typed. He even mocked Darius by name. The emails were forwarded to federal regulators without hesitation. At Concord Regional Airport, the atmosphere had changed. Gate 7, now LD7, was a model of decorum and precision. Agents trained in new protocol observed via passive feedback algorithms. Each employee was aware, but not afraid, empowered by clarity, not burdened by secrecy. The janitorial staff had been invited to share observations. Maintenance crews were instructed to report misconduct, not just mechanical issues. Darius had made it clear respect wasn't confined to class or job title. A new hierarchy was rising, one built on behavior, not badge. That evening, the shadows stretched across the tarmac as a private Langston Dynamics shuttle touched down. From it stepped three government observers, briefcases in hand, escorted by Langston personnel. Their purpose was discreet but unmistakable integration evaluation. Not of Langston's tech, of Langston's approach. Across the country, other agencies had taken notice. Homeland Security, the FAA, even the Department of Transportation. Not just because Darius had proven that a bag could cancel a route, but because he'd revealed a replicable framework for ethical oversight in an age of digital surveillance. In his office, Darius stared at the quiet cityscape beyond the tinted glass. Somewhere below, people were boarding flights, checking bags, sipping coffee, laughing, reading. He didn't want to rule over them. He wanted to protect them from the unchecked authority he had once faced head-on. His phone buzzed, a message from his ethics chief, preliminary results in. Bias index at LD7 dropped 62% in the first 30 days. He allowed himself the briefest smile. That was what this had become, a reckoning by metric. A crusade carried out not through emotion, but evidence. One of his associates entered. Mr. Langston, the oversight team from Minneapolis, is asking if they can integrate Sentinel at MSP's Terminal 3. They said you were right. About everything. He nodded. Tell them we'll do a beta, but only if their staff has a say in the rollout. They need to own it. That had always been the secret. When people feel ownership, they act with integrity. When they feel observed without agency, they either rebel or retreat. At 37,000 feet above, a different flight cruised silently through the stars. On board, a gate agent from Concord sat next to her teenage son. She looked out the window, still shaken from the fallout. But she was also changed. She remembered the moment Darius had walked through that terminal without raising his voice, without lashing out. He just stood there and turned the world upside down. Her son leaned over. Mom, are you okay? She blinked back emotion. I'm learning, she said softly. We all are. The morning light broke through the steel-framed windows of the Langston Dynamics HQ, catching the edge of a massive digital display titled Ethical Violation Matrix, Phase 2. Rows of data shifted in real time, and at the center of it all sat Darius Langston, hunched over a low-glass conference table, deep in thought. He hadn't slept much, not because of stress, but because of momentum. Because something once invisible had finally been made visible. The headlines were still multiplying. Black CEO flips the system, the gate that started a movement, from bag to blueprint. Every outlet had an angle, but none truly grasped the scope. To them, it was a sensational disruption. To Darius, it was a beginning. Across the city at a university lecture hall, Dr. Vanessa Myers, an expert in public infrastructure ethics, was streaming footage of the Gate 7 incident to a packed auditorium. Power, she told her students, is rarely taken violently anymore. It's taken administratively. And Mr. Langston flipped that power not with confrontation, but with contractual literacy. Students typed furiously. Back at Ascenda Air HQ, the fallout continued. The board's emergency response team had just received a formal notification Langston Dynamics was now submitting compliance threshold reports, not monthly but weekly, each one feeding into an AI that flagged microaggressions before they escalated. Legal murmurs rippled. This wasn't just corporate accountability. This was operational surveillance being morally reframed. And for the first time, an airline was not in control of its own data. Nathan Barrett's name had become digital graffiti across forums and professional networks, a symbol not of one man's arrogance, but of an outdated system's fragility. His personnel file thick now with internal testimonies, misconduct logs, and terminal analytics sat waiting for final arbitration. The irony. He still hadn't grasped how completely he'd lost. He believed he'd embarrassed a man in line. He didn't realize he'd ignited a revolution in the sky. In a small cafe near the airport, two Langston Dynamics engineers huddled over tablets. "We're deploying the empathy algorithm," next one said. "It'll track tone modulation and eye contact duration, nonverbal red flags, and the AI will log it all, real-time sentiment maps, every gate, every agent." A pause. "We're not building oversight," the second engineer whispered. "We're building conscience." Back in Darius's office, a notification pinged. A flight attendant, once silenced after raising a complaint about gate discrimination, had just sent a thank you email. She hadn't planned to speak again. Until now. Until someone proved it was possible to be heard without shouting, to create consequence without chaos. At Concord, Regional Gate 7 had been reopened with little ceremony, but every detail had changed. Glass walls replaced barriers. Name tags now displayed first names only to remind agents and passengers of shared humanity. Overhead signage no longer barked instructions, it welcomed in clean minimal text, "Respect begins here." A family approached the gate with visible hesitation. The father, a black man in a tailored coat, held the hand of his young daughter. Their carry-on was slightly over the standard. The agent, a woman in a sharp navy uniform, didn't flinch. She scanned the tag, paused, and smiled. "Gray tag clearance approved. You're all set." The father blinked in surprise. "Really?" "Of course. You've already done everything right." As they passed, the daughter looked up and said, "That's a nice gate." The agent smiled wider. "It is now." Meanwhile, Darius sat with his executive team, eyes fixed on a live call with one of Ascenda Air's major institutional investors. "I want to be clear," the investor said. "You've become the moral compass of this industry." Darius didn't flinch. "That's not our goal." The investor leaned in. "But you're setting the standard, and everyone else is watching." And it was true. Delta had begun talks with Langston Dynamics. So had Emirates. Even the Federal Transit Administration had requested a briefing. This wasn't just posturing. This was institutional reckoning. As the call ended, Darius stepped into the elevator alone. The floors ticked down slowly, mirroring his thoughts. He wasn't trying to build a legacy. He was trying to repair a fracture. One born in silence, maintained by indifference, and now exposed by data, sharpened by accountability, and carried forward by action. The elevator doors opened to the lobby where a young employee stood, eyes wide. "You're Mr. Langston," he stammered. Darius gave a small nod. "I just wanted to say..." The young man hesitated. "Thank you for not walking away." Darius placed a hand on the man's shoulder, steady and calm. Walking away is how the old system survived. Then he left the building, not as a man seeking applause, but as one moving toward the next battleground. Because the fight wasn't over. It had only changed altitude. Inside a downtown law office, the hum of overhead lights was interrupted only by the sharp scratching of pens against notepads. At the head of the table sat Marcus Bell, Darius Langston's general counsel. His glasses glinted as he tapped a thick dossier labeled in bold, "Ascenda Air Terminal Rights Revocation Phase 1. "This isn't about embarrassment," he said to the team of legal analysts around him. "This is about leverage." And Langston Dynamics now controls the pivot point of their operational heartbeat. Every eye locked on the packet. Inside were termination clauses, joint venture fallbacks, and legally binding performance metrics. In short, a noose woven from Ascenda's own neglected policies and now pulled tight by Darius's strategic patience. Back at Langston Dynamics, the mood wasn't celebratory, it was surgical. Teams were already mapping the expansion of LD7, the new Langston-managed hub replacing Gate 7. They weren't just renovating a space, they were reprogramming behavior. Darius entered the operations command room where a dozen monitors displayed live feeds from various terminals under Langston's influence. Cameras didn't just track passengers, they tracked patterns, excessive screenings, body language shifts in interactions, even delays in eye contact by staff. "Start the scrub," Darius said. His chief analyst nodded, inputting a command. Lines of code flickered, and the system began isolating anomalies instances where behavior strayed from baseline civility. This wasn't surveillance, this was structural hygiene. And Darius would enforce it the same way he built everything, quietly, relentlessly. But even as Langston Dynamics expanded, a different kind of pressure mounted. At Ascenda Air HQ, Harold Wynn, the airline's embattled CEO, stood before a bank of reporters. "We are cooperating fully with Langston Dynamics," he said through gritted teeth. "We acknowledge that improvements must be made." The statement was carefully crafted, neutered of real accountability. But the public wasn't buying it. Outside, protesters marched in waves. Gate 7 was just the beginning, read one sign. Another dignity delayed is dignity denied. It wasn't just about Darius anymore. It was about the silent humiliations that thousands had endured for years without camera crews or press briefings. And now the whole world was watching. Meanwhile, Darius was back in Concord, standing in the renovated terminal. He wasn't giving a speech. He wasn't filming a press piece. He was doing what he always did, observing. A mother approached the new gate with her young son. Her carry-on was slightly bulky and her posture stiffened as the agent looked at it. "Gray tag," the agent said before she could speak. "Welcome aboard." The mother's shoulders relaxed. The boy grinned. That was the goal. Not just policy change, not just lawsuits. Relief. The kind that lingers unspoken when people stop expecting to be punished for existing. At that moment, Darius's phone buzzed. It was a secure notification from his internal ethics council. Barrett's full misconduct timeline confirmed. 3 dozen violations, 2 ignored whistleblowers. 1 doctored report. The final recommendation was simple: terminate with prejudice. Flag for industry blacklist. He stared at the message for a moment, then pressed authorize. Back at Ascenda HQ, Barrett sat in an HR conference room, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. 2 executives sat across from him, blank-faced, while a third slid a formal letter across the table. "This is retaliation," Barrett snapped, but even he didn't believe it anymore. "This is politics." "No," the HR lead said quietly. "This is pattern recognition." Barrett stared at the letter unsigned. Unavoidable. He was no longer a liability. He was a risk profile. And in an industry under federal audit, risks get removed. Hours later, Darius sat across from a quiet group of business leaders and equity partners. Men and women who controlled billions in infrastructure investment gathered to hear one thing. What comes next? Flight M218 was the trigger Darius began. But the fault lines were already there. Gate 7 was just a fracture. The entire foundation is compromised. He leaned forward. "We don't need revenge. We need architecture." They nodded. "What are you proposing?" asked one. "A nationwide equity rating system for transit," Darius said. "Passenger fairness scores, ethics dashboards, institutional transparency tied to infrastructure funding." A pause. "And who oversees it?" another investor asked. Darius looked them dead in the eyes. "We do." And with those 3 words, the scope of the story shifted again. What began as a carry-on denial had become a full-scale shift in who got to write the rules of travel. Darius Langston wasn't just defending dignity, he was redesigning the blueprints of access, and the world was finally ready to follow. Would you like me to continue with part 13? 40 band deny, yes, ChatGPT deny. Here is part 13 of the cinematic morality story. Black CEO denied boarding for oversized bag 10 minutes later. He cancels the entire route. Part 13 in 50 words. The announcement was brief, clinical, and devastating. Effective immediately, Ascenda Air's M-Series route operations have been suspended, pending internal audit and federal compliance review. The message flashed across every gate monitor in Concordia Regional Airport and dozens of other terminals nationwide. Within minutes, confusion turned into panic, and panic turned into headlines. But Darius Langston wasn't watching the chaos unfold. He was 3 levels underground in a Langston Dynamics war room, surrounded by dark glass panels and biometric clearance points. Only a few people on Earth had access here, and even fewer understood the implications of what they were about to launch. Status, Darius asked. Passenger flow interruption confirmed across 17 terminals. Internal employee messaging scrambling to adapt. Their systems aren't built for this kind of override, replied his logistics officer. Darius gave a single nod. This wasn't about breaking systems. It was about exposing the ones already broken. On a large digital map, red pins marked every gate where violations had occurred, every silent instance where someone had been profiled, mistreated, or dismissed because of a name, an accent, a skin tone. These aren't just glitches, Darius said, his voice even. These are blueprints. You want to see how a system values people? Watch who gets treated like they don't belong. He turned to his team. Let's flip the blueprint. Back at Ascenda's corporate headquarters, the boardroom was in full lockdown. Half the executives were shouting, the other half whispering into phones. Win, this is a PR disaster, one of the regional VPs snapped. You told us Langston wouldn't go this far, CEO. Harold Wynn rubbed his temples. He had underestimated Darius, everyone had. They assumed he'd move on, file a lawsuit, maybe post a statement. But Darius hadn't just fought back. He'd rewired the battleground. One by one terminals were falling under Langston Dynamics' influence. Not by force, but by contract. Infrastructure upgrades meant data pipelines, and Langston owned half of them. A quiet knock interrupted the chaos. A woman in a navy blazer stepped in, holding a silver tablet. The FAA just pinged our compliance hotline, she said. They've launched a preliminary inquiry. They want to review surveillance data from the Barrett incident. Everyone in the room froze. Not because of the incident itself, but because of what they didn't document, what they covered instead. On the opposite coast, inside a media studio in Atlanta, the story was already trending. Was it about the bag, one anchor asked? Her guest, a civil rights attorney, shook his head. The bag was the spark, but the fire was always there. The boarding agent didn't just deny a CEO. He disrespected the law, his own airline's clearance protocols, and a human being. The anchor leaned forward. What happens next? The attorney looked straight into the camera. Whatever Darius Langston decides. In a private airport hangar, Darius stood beside his silver carry-on. Not a scratch on it, not a fingerprint. Just clean lines and flawless design like everything Langston Dynamics created. His head of communications approached, tablet in hand, the stories spiraling. We've got interviews requested from CNN, Bloomberg, BBC, even Netflix. Darius didn't look impressed. I'm not giving them a soundbite, he said. No, I'm giving them a standard. Later that afternoon, the Langston Transit Equity Initiative went live. A sleek website, a transparent database, a live dashboard that allowed passengers to submit incident reports and see how often their airport flagged individuals for secondary screening, a color-coded map showing complaint trends. Even a scorecard for each terminal, green for compliant, red for suspect. Within an hour, 4.6 million users had logged on. Within 6 hours, the Department of Transportation sent a formal memo to Ascenda Air demanding a reconciliation plan. Within 24 hours, gate agents across the country began receiving new protocols from Langston Dynamics. The old rulebook had been shredded, and a new one was being installed in real time. But Darius wasn't stopping there. At a Langston executive briefing that evening, he laid out the next step. We build the first bias-free travel corridor, he said. The room went still. A corridor, his VP asked. A pilot program across 6 cities. Fully managed terminals. AI oversight. Random audits. Cultural sensitivity. Certification for every frontline employee. He looked at the map on the screen behind him. By the time Ascenda realizes they've lost control of the industry, we'll already be 3 quarters ahead. Won't they fight it? Someone asked. Darius smiled faintly. They'll try, but the public has already picked a side. And indeed, across social media, across coffee shops, airports, and living rooms, people were no longer asking what happened. They were asking, what are we part of? A reckoning, an evolution, a long overdue correction. And at its center stood a man who had asked for nothing more than to board a plane with the bag that carried his vision, denied once. Now redefining everything. The morning after the public release of the Langston Transit Equity Initiative, something unprecedented occurred at Concordia Regional Airport. Gate 7, once a symbol of humiliation, was now ground zero for transformation. Contractors arrived at dawn. The terminal was cordoned off with polished barriers bearing the Langston Dynamics emblem. Inside, crews worked fast, ripping up old carpet, removing signage, replacing screens. Above it all, one sleek banner stretched across the upper panel of the jet bridge. Coming soon, LD7, a new standard in dignity-driven travel. And standing just beyond the glass arms folded across his chest was Darius Langston. He didn't come for the cameras. He came for the silence before the noise. Behind him, his team observed the transformation. Analysts, engineers, architects, not of buildings but of change. This isn't just about a gate, said his chief strategist. You're rebuilding the culture. No, Darius replied. I'm revealing it. Elsewhere in the airport, chaos lingered. Ascenda agents were scrambling to adjust. Policy memos were flooding inboxes. At terminals in New York, Chicago, and Houston, agents were being retrained not because they wanted to, but because the public demanded it. Darius had tapped into something deeper than protest. He'd offered the world a blueprint. Across social media, travelers began sharing their experiences with the hashtag Gate7Truth. Some were recent subtle gestures, uneven treatment, silent slights. Others were old stories finally finding space to breathe. But one post changed everything. A video, recorded secretly 5 years ago by a former Ascenda employee. It showed Nathan Barrett, the same agent who denied Darius boarding, berating an elderly black woman over a bag of medical equipment. Her voice was frail, trembling as she explained the situation. Barrett mocked her accent, then smirked as he waved her off the flight. The video went viral in under an hour. By noon, Barrett's name had become shorthand for discrimination. And by evening, Ascenda Air had terminated him. But Darius wasn't celebrating. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for systemic memory, the kind that didn't just fire a bad apple, but interrogated the soil that let him grow. Back at Langston Dynamics HQ, a legal task force assembled. 17 attorneys, 3 ethics consultants, 1 mission draft, the accountability mandate. The document would serve as the new gold standard for airline conduct. It called for biometric bias detection software, third-party complaint investigations, and rotating diversity auditors at major hubs. And it wouldn't be optional. Darius had already linked its terms to Langston Dynamics' infrastructure contracts. If Ascenda and any other airline wanted continued access to Langston's terminals, they'd sign the mandate or lose the route. No more workshops, Darius said to the room. No more hollow pledges. You either prove your culture has changed or you lose the right to participate. Across town at Ascenda headquarters, panic had turned to desperation. Internal leaks were emerging. Confidential HR reports, archived complaints, sealed settlements, all pouring into public forums. Barrett's case was no longer isolated. It was a breadcrumb trail through years of ignored accountability. One report detailed a disabled veteran being denied assistance at Gate 14. Another cited a pregnant woman forced to stand through a 2-hour delay because no one believed she had a first-class ticket. In both reports, the same supervisor's name appeared. And in both cases, those complaints had been quietly closed without action. The media didn't need a scandal. Darius had given them a system, and the system was now on trial. By the end of the week, Langston Dynamics had been invited to testify before the Transportation Ethics Committee. Lawmakers were calling it the Darius Doctrine, a data-backed case for overhauling the travel industry's regulatory oversight. And Darius, he showed up, not in a luxury car, not in a tailored suit, but in a black sweater and dark jeans carrying the same silver bag that had started it all. His testimony was calm, direct, devastating. Gatekeeping, he told the room, is not just about policies, it's about perception. Every time someone is made to feel less human, less worthy over something as simple as a boarding pass, we're not enforcing rules, we're enabling rot. The room was silent. Then he placed the silver bag on the desk, opened it, and revealed the classified prototype inside. This was what I was carrying that day, a breakthrough in national defense telemetry. Had it been delayed 24 hours, the contract tied to it would have collapsed, costing 300 American jobs. He closed the bag and looked at each official. I didn't cancel that flight out of anger. I did it because systems don't reform unless they're interrupted. I interrupted yours. No one dared speak. When Darius left the chamber, the silence followed him. Not because they disagreed, but because they understood. That day, Concorda's skies stayed quiet. No M-series planes lifted off. No passengers boarded. But inside Langston Dynamics, the hum of servers, the quiet tapping of keyboards, and the pulse of change surged forward. And outside, a quiet crowd gathered at the airport, not to protest but to thank him. The following morning, as the sun rose over Concordia Regional Airport, a quiet scene unfolded at Gate 7, now renamed LD7. A new digital board had been installed overnight displaying the message, Langston Passenger Integrity Systems now active. Inside the newly renovated terminal, agents moved with visible awareness. Every action was now monitored not by fear, but by transparency. Cameras were embedded not just for security, but for fairness. The terminal had become a living system of accountability. Darius Langston stood once more near the tinted glass, watching the gate from a higher vantage point in the executive control room. Behind him, two engineers monitored the new real-time AI dashboard tracking emotional tone word patterns and behavioral flags from interactions at boarding counters across the country. One terminal in Miami flagged an interaction. The AI tagged it potential bias escalation, tone dismissive, passenger profile, elderly non-English speaker. The system auto-deployed a live review and dispatched a third-party monitor before the incident could spiral. Darius said nothing. He simply nodded once. This was why he built it. Not to punish, to prevent. Across the country, media outlets had rebranded Gate 7's story into something larger. Morning talk shows, podcasts, and op-eds buzzed with a new question. What does a fair travel future look like? And almost all pointed to one man, Darius Langston. But Darius was never interested in being a symbol. He was interested in the system underneath the symbol. Back at Ascenda Air HQ, a stark change had overtaken the executive boardroom. The old leadership table had been replaced with a circular one, Darius's first condition for staying involved. No more head of the table, he'd said bluntly. No more hierarchy of silence. 5 new board members had been appointed, each vetted by Langston Dynamics. 2 of them were former airline staffers who had once filed ignored complaints. One was a transportation equity advocate. Another had been a whistleblower from a different airline altogether. At the first meeting, Darius laid out a clear ultimatum. We are not patching a broken machine, he said. We're building a new one. If anyone here wants to play politics, leave now. Because this time the passengers are watching. Not a single person moved. Meanwhile, Nathan Barrett, formerly the face of Gate 7, had disappeared from the public eye. His attempt at a redemption video had backfired. The world didn't want apologies without action. He had become a case study in arrogance. In leadership seminars and cultural training sessions across industries, his name now followed the phrase, what not to become. Inside Langston Dynamics, progress accelerated. The Langston Transit Equity Initiative expanded into Phase 2. This phase introduced predictive analytics algorithms trained not just on past discrimination, but on anticipating policy loopholes that allowed inequity to survive. It flagged legacy policies like gate agent discretion, random secondary screenings, appearance-based boarding checks. Darius reviewed the flag terms personally. Get rid of all of them, he said. If the system depends on personal discretion, the bias has already won. But change didn't come without friction. In several airports, staff pushed back. It's overreach, some argued. It's micromanagement. But then came the memo. A 300-page report leaked by a former regional manager detailed how airports had been suppressing internal bias complaints to preserve their operational metrics. The report included anonymized transcripts of training sessions where managers advised staff to be polite but firm when denying boarding to non-standard travelers. It was chilling. The media ran headlines like "Politeness as a Weapon, How Airlines Mass Discrimination and Procedure." And once again, the public sided with Darius. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't need to. His work was the statement. Weeks passed. Gate LD7 became a site of pilgrimage for travelers who once felt unseen. A grandmother posted a selfie with her boarding pass writing, "The first time in 20 years I wasn't asked to step aside." A trans man tweeted, "LD7 didn't stare. LD7 didn't hesitate. LD7 just welcomed me." A teenage boy uploaded a short video whispering tearfully, "They called me sir and didn't flinch." The stories poured in, and with them the proof the system could change. One afternoon, as Darius reviewed the month's performance metrics with his CTO, he paused. On the dashboard was a graph tracking discretionary interventions across airports. It had dropped 67% since Langston's protocols were installed. He sat back and smiled just slightly, not because he'd won, but because for once the system had lost. That night, a quiet ceremony was held at Concordia. No press, no speeches, just a few dozen people, passengers, whistleblowers, frontline workers, and Langston's closest allies. They unveiled a plaque at gate LD7. It read, "Dignity doesn't travel alone. This gate stands for those who refuse to sit quietly, and for the future that finally listened." Darius didn't speak. He simply stood with them. He knew the work was far from over. But tonight they could breathe, and tomorrow they'd keep building. The following week brought storm clouds, both literal and political. A major aviation lobby backed by several large carriers filed a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation claiming that Langston Dynamics' growing influence represented unregulated corporate overreach into federally governed airspace. It was a thinly veiled attack, a distraction, but it got media traction. One cable network ran a segment headlined, "Tech Tyranny Should One Man Decide Airline Policy." The pundits debated. Some nodded along, others pushed back. But to Darius Langston, it wasn't a debate, it was a pattern. Every time equity challenges legacy power, he told his chief of policy, they scream about control. Not fairness, control. He didn't flinch. Instead, he went back to work. Langston Dynamics' legal team filed a counter motion within 48 hours, citing decades of underreported discrimination complaints and the need for real-time oversight as a public safety issue. But Darius had something stronger than court filings. He had people, and their stories were flooding in. A former flight attendant messaged, "I quit after I was told to be extra cautious around black male passengers. Thank you for holding them accountable." A mother wrote, "My autistic son was removed from a flight last year for non-compliance. At LD7, your team helped him feel safe. I cried, thank you." But the most powerful message came from a former gate agent at Gate 7. It was a simple email. "You don't know me, but I worked beside Barrett for 3 years. I saw what he did. I said nothing. I thought I couldn't change anything. But you did. I'm sorry, and I'm thankful." Darius read that email 3 times. He didn't respond. He forwarded it to his internal culture team. "Put this in training, make it the first slide." Change, he knew, was most powerful when it came from within. But Ascenda's old guard wasn't done fighting. Behind closed doors, remnants of the previous executive committee had convened. Men and women who once ran the airline with an iron grip now sat around a boardroom table cloaked in panic. "Langston's protocols are spreading like wildfire," one executive spat. 6 airports signed up this week. "If we don't stop this, we lose control." They debated hiring PR firms, filing injunctions, launching a counter-campaign about traditional values in aviation. But nothing stuck, because the numbers didn't lie. Customer satisfaction at LD7 had surged 40%. Complaint rates had dropped 61%. Even employee retention improved. Langston's model didn't just work, it was winning. And so in desperation, they tried a final move. They leaked a confidential memo accusing Langston Dynamics of data overcollection and surveillance abuse. Within hours, news sites picked up headlines like "Langston watching you equity" or "Invasion is privacy, the price of progress." For the first time since the confrontation at Gate 7, Darius found himself on the defensive. He gathered his executive team in a dark paneled conference room overlooking the skyline. The rain outside tapped faintly against the glass. "I expected this," he said quietly. "But not this soon," his CTO interjected. "We've got compliance reports from every active site. No violations. Every scan is opt-in. Every interaction is logged and protected." Darius nodded. "Doesn't matter. It's not about facts. It's about fear." He stood slowly and walked to the tall window hands behind his back. "This isn't about surveillance. It's about control. They're scared because we made the rules visible. We made the invisible undeniable. A long silence. Then he turned. Let's give them a reason to be scared. That week, Langston Dynamics released the Public Integrity Dashboard, a real-time transparency tool that displayed anonymized metrics on passenger interactions, flagged incidents, and equity scores across partnered airports. Everything was color-coded. Everything was public. Within 72 hours, 7 more airports requested onboarding. The move shocked the industry. One reporter called it the most radical act of corporate accountability since OSHA was born. But for Darius, it was just logic. Systems don't fear transparency, he told a live stream summit. Only people who abuse them do. The backlash stalled. And Barrett. His story had become cautionary. His face a meme. His actions dissected in diversity training across the country. Meanwhile, LD7 was named the first federal equity-certified terminal in U.S. aviation history. It made history books. But Darius stayed quiet, always a step ahead. Because even as the media fawned and politicians started calling, he remained focused on the next stage of legacy infrastructure. Airlines had modernized jets, not systems. They upgraded engines, not empathy. So Darius announced the Langston Legacy Retrofit Program, an initiative to retrofit older terminals with AI ethics protocols, inclusive design, and dignity-first staff training. It was bold, expensive, and utterly disruptive. And within a month, the FAA had scheduled a closed-door session to explore making it mandatory by 2027. By then, it was no longer about Darius Langston. It was about what he proved, that the skies could be fair, that the gates could welcome instead of filter, that one man armed not with rage but resolve could shift the course of an industry built to exclude. And all because someone once told him, your bag's too big. The old plaque above Gate 7 had been removed. In its place now gleamed a sleek black emblem etched with silver LD7 Langston Dynamics Equity Hub. The transformation was complete. What had once been a symbol of exclusion, where gate agents like Barrett wielded petty power without oversight, was now a global model for equity-driven innovation in public spaces. But for Darius Langston, it wasn't enough, because systems don't change from buildings. They change from within. And so he made the next move quietly, strategically. Langston Dynamics partnered with 3 leading universities to create the Langston Equity Fellowship, a program that placed rising professionals of color in positions within aviation transportation and public infrastructure. It was more than a scholarship. It was an infiltration of dignity, planting seeds in boardrooms that had long been closed to people like him. And the fellows weren't just students, they were disruptors in training. But back at Ascenda Air, the fractures were still widening. Despite all the changes, there were still pockets of resistance, executives clinging to old models, investors pressuring the company to regain narrative control. One senior VP, desperate to restore balance, quietly commissioned a private firm to dig into Langston's history. Their goal, find something, anything that could discredit him. The firm combed through everything: tax records, college transcripts, early business filings, even personal relationships. And what they found was silence. No scandals, no shady deals, no buried lawsuits. Just a man who had worked twice as hard to earn half the assumption of competence and built something undeniable in the process. Even the lead investigator sent a quiet message back to the VP. He's clean. The kind of clean that scares people who aren't. So the narrative changed again. When smearing failed, the opposition tried to co-opt the movement. Suddenly, competitors were announcing their own equity zones in airports, colorful signage, smiling faces, even inclusive ads featuring diverse passengers laughing together. But Darius saw through it. It was diversity as decor, equity without enforcement. So he pushed further. Langston Dynamics launched a new certification program, the Dignity First Compliance Seal. Airports had to meet 23 accountability benchmarks in categories, ranging from complaint resolution speed to staff equity training frequency. And then he did something bold. He licensed the program for free to smaller regional airports, those often ignored in big infrastructure deals. The result? A wave of quiet reform across the country. From Charleston to Bakersfield, from Tucson to Albany Airport, managers began adopting LD standards not because of PR pressure, but because passengers demanded it. Meanwhile, Darius remained mostly out of the spotlight. He appeared briefly at a tech summit in Oslo, where he gave a 7-minute talk that ended with just one line: "The future isn't innovation, it's correction." And with that, he left the stage. Back home, Barrett's name had all but vanished from the public record. He disappeared after his failed apology video, rumored to be working under an alias in a rural county office. No one really knew. No one really cared, because history had already assigned him his role: a gatekeeper who forgot who built the gate. But not all stories were silent. A letter arrived at Langston's office, handwritten. It was from a teenage boy who had been present at Gate 7 the day of the confrontation. He'd filmed the moment, his camera tucked discreetly behind his phone. "Mr. Langston, I was scared to post it. I didn't want to get involved. But I showed it to my class when we had to talk about ethics. My teacher cried. I just wanted to say, thank you. I think I want to be like you." Darius held the letter for a long time. No camera crews, no press release, just ink and hope. He had always believed change didn't need applause. It needed evidence. And this was it. Proof that what began with a denial and a carry-on had become something permanent. Meanwhile, Langston Dynamics announced a partnership with the Federal Transportation Board to embed real-time discrimination response protocols across all major national terminals. It was unprecedented and controversial. Some called it overreach. Others called it overdue. But by now, Darius had stopped listening to noise. He understood a truth the old system had long ignored. Progress doesn't wait for permission, and it definitely doesn't stop for fragile egos. Back at LD7, a new generation of gate agents stood behind the counters, trained, accountable, respectful. They didn't just check tickets, they checked assumptions. And in a room behind the terminal, a plaque hung beneath a framed photo of Darius Langston, his silver carry-on gleaming at his side. The bag was never too big. The system was always too small. Morning light filtered through the expansive glass facade of Langston Dynamics HQ. A soft hum of servers pulsed beneath the floor, powering the algorithms that now safeguarded fairness across major transportation hubs. But today, Darius Langston's focus wasn't on tech, it was on trust. He stood before a panel of civic leaders, industry heads, and media representatives in a conference hall overlooking the skyline. The invitation-only event had one purpose: unveiling the Langston Equity Index, the world's first live scoring model that graded institutions on implicit bias outcomes in real time. Metrics matter, Darius began, voice calm but heavy with conviction. But bias thrives where data hides, so today we bring it into the light. The presentation unfolded with precision. The system tracked decision-making patterns: who got flagged, who got passed over, how quickly complaints were resolved, and whether implicit bias affected access. As the demo concluded, one of the more skeptical audience members, a regional airport director, stood. "Isn't this a bit extreme? You're turning every employee into a statistic." Darius didn't flinch. "Every passenger already is," he said. "The question is whether you're willing to look at the story the data tells." The room fell silent, because the data had already begun rewriting everything. Ascenda Air, still reeling from stock volatility and boardroom reshuffling, had grudgingly signed on as the first major airline to implement the full index. They hadn't done it out of goodwill. They'd done it because investors demanded accountability, and the public had made their message clear: no change, no business. Back at Gate 7, now LD7, things had changed dramatically. Flight agent training had become a rigorous program modeled after behavioral intelligence modules designed by Langston Dynamics. Incidents of flagged bias down 82%, customer satisfaction record highs. It wasn't just a renovated gate anymore, it was a living case study. Still, not everyone welcomed the change. At a quiet executive bar near LAX, two airline CEOs nursed drinks over a dimly lit table. "This guy's dangerous," one muttered. "He's reshaping the industry with a story and a spreadsheet." The other leaned back. "And the worst part? He's right, we just didn't see it coming." But Darius had. He knew that disruption didn't start with tech. It started with a moment of humiliation, one that exposed a system too brittle to self-correct. Now he was turning that moment into a movement. Later that evening, Darius sat alone in his office reviewing a list of newly submitted complaints from other airports. They came in like clockwork, some anonymous, some signed in desperation. But one stood out. It was from an airline employee and agent, young, Hispanic, Female. I watched what happened to you. I used to be like Barrett. I didn't realize it, but I enforced rules without asking why they existed. I'm learning now. Your system helped me see it. Darius read the note twice, then forwarded it to his ethics counsel with 2 words: keep going. That night, a storm rolled in over the city. Thunder echoed across rooftops and rain lashed against the wide windows of Langston HQ. But inside the building glowed a beacon amid the tempest. In the Langston control room, a digital map displayed real-time behavioral data across airports. Green lines indicated healthy operations. Yellow flags signaled trends to monitor. Red dots areas of active bias or unresolved complaints. Darius leaned over the railing of the mezzanine overlooking the map. This, he said quietly to his CTO beside him, is what accountability looks like. The CTO, a former civil rights lawyer turned technologist, nodded. And soon he replied, they'll have to explain to shareholders why their dots are still red. Meanwhile, at Ascenda's crisis PR war room, executives scrambled. The Barrett scandal had triggered a class action lawsuit. Over a dozen passengers had come forward with documented claims. Each case included screenshots, surveillance footage, and thanks to Langston Dynamics' new software, automated behavioral scoring from the gate agents involved. For the first time, the system itself became the witness. And it didn't lie. One board member scanning through the depositions muttered, "We should have settled." But it was too late. Langston had made sure of that, not for vengeance, but for precedent. Because when systems fear sunlight, the only way forward is through transparency. Back in his office, Darius received a final email before calling it a night. It was from a mother in Detroit whose daughter had just flown alone for the first time. She told me the gate agent said, "We're Langston trained here. That means we treat people right." Thank you for giving her that. Darius smiled faintly. It wasn't the metrics. It wasn't the headlines. It was a single mother who didn't have to worry about whether her child would be seen, heard, or respected. That's why he started it all. Not for power, not even for justice, but for peace of mind. And now that it had begun, he wasn't stopping. The storm that had once gathered in whispers now roared in headlines. Every major news outlet ran stories tracing the fallout from Gate 7. But as the spotlight burned hotter, Darius Langston stayed out of it. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing reform. Across the globe, airports began requesting audits from Langston Dynamics. The equity index wasn't just a tool, it had become a standard. And with every terminal that adopted it, the system grew smarter, more precise. Still, change came with resistance. At a private roundtable of aviation executives in Geneva, old money clashed with new ethics. Airports don't need algorithms judging us, barked a European board chairman. They need experienced eyes making tough calls. But a younger voice cut in, a new CEO from a growing South African airline, her tone sharp. Your eyes missed too much for too long. That's why we need metrics. We don't get to say we didn't see it anymore. Darius wasn't at that meeting, but his influence was. Back at Langston HQ, he watched the ripple effect on his dashboards. Bias detection triggers dropped steadily. Complaint resolution speed increased across every location running his system. The numbers told the truth. Dignity was measurable. In the background, the case against Ascenda Air was heating up. Barrett, once defiant, now stood silent as depositions mounted. His attorneys tried to paint the event as a misunderstanding, a routine dispute over a carry-on. But Darius's legal team came prepared with receipts. Every override prompt, every internal policy ignored, every prior complaint time-stamped and unresolved. The defense unraveled quickly. In a federal hearing streamed live for transparency, the judge leaned forward, scanning a printed report. "You mean to tell me," she said, her voice low, "this employee was allowed to manually reject a national security-cleared exemption?" After 3 separate digital alerts, the room froze. Barrett's lawyer fumbled. "Your Honor, it was likely a systems glitch." The judge raised a brow. The system worked fine. He ignored it. And just like that, the turning point arrived. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs that read, "It was never just a bag. Gate 7 is everywhere." Back at Concord Regional, LD7 had become more than a gate. It was now a training hub, a model for what ethical travel could look like. Langston Dynamics flew an airport staff from across the country for immersive programs, bias recognition, tech integration, and dignity-first protocols. And Darius, he watched from a distance. He wasn't the type to stand behind podiums. But he did send someone, Jasmine, a quiet project lead in his behavioral ethics division, took the stage at a major tech expo. She held up a simple diagram, a feedback loop. When passengers are heard, agents are held accountable. When agents are trained, passengers are protected. When systems are transparent, trust becomes measurable. The audience erupted. Her talk trended for 3 days. And Langston Dynamics, their onboarding requests tripled, but not everything was smooth. A competing airline, Vast Air, leaked internal memos attempting to downplay the Gate 7 reforms. They painted Langston's system as invasive warning of privacy concerns and overcorrection. Darius read the memos and smiled. They were scared. Because unlike PR campaigns, Langston Dynamics worked silently. Its changes didn't need billboards. They lived in the behavior of employees who no longer whispered stereotypes at the gate, in passengers who didn't have to ask twice to be seen, in data streams that told the truth no matter who tried to hide it. Meanwhile, Barrett's fall wasn't over. In a leaked message from an internal HR investigation, former colleagues revealed a damning pattern. He made the rules bend when it suited him. He flagged people just to remind them who was in charge. He laughed when someone cried after missing a flight. Each sentence was another crack in Ascenda's armor. And then came the final blow. An internal whistleblower released footage showing Barrett being warned months before the incident with a memo titled "Conduct at Gate 7 Pattern Deviation Noted." It had been ignored. Now federal regulators opened an inquiry into systemic discrimination across Ascenda's operations. In a sleek black conference room at Langston HQ, Darius's core team met late into the night. His chief of operations leaned forward. "We've forced change, but it's not enough." "What's next?" Darius tapped his tablet, opening a slide labeled Phase 2 Contract Accountability. He explained calmly, "Every time a major corporation signs a partnership with us, they must agree to bias audits and transparency clauses. No loopholes, no delays, and every violation becomes public." Someone asked, "Won't they fight it?" "They will," Darius replied, "and they'll lose," because the world had changed, and Darius Langston had become more than a CEO. He was the architect of a new standard. Rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Langston Tower, the city's skyline fading into a foggy blue. Inside the top-floor boardroom, Darius Langston stood alone, arms folded, his gaze fixed on the blinking red light of an inbound message. It wasn't just any message. It was confirmation. Ascenda Air's board had signed the Compliance Integrity Pact. After months of resistance, legal maneuvering, and public pressure, the airline had agreed to full operational audit access, executive retraining, and joint oversight of gate-level procedures at all major terminals. Darius didn't smile. He nodded once, then walked to the long oak table and picked up a small, worn leather notebook. Inside were scribbled lines, thoughts, observations, and fragments of conversations he'd recorded during the fallout from Gate 7. The first page held only 2 words scrawled in his own handwriting: "Never again." This was never about a bow, or a seat, or a gate agent. It was about the layers of silent compromise that had built an industry on assumption and exclusion. Darius remembered what it felt like to be told no, not because of weight limits or procedures, but because someone had decided he didn't belong. That quiet dismissal had echoed far louder than any gate announcement. But now the rules had changed. At airports across the country, terminals equipped with Langston Dynamics systems flagged biased language in real time. Agents who once joked in coded terms behind the counter now received automatic coaching alerts. Oversized no longer meant subjective. At LD7, the site of the original confrontation change was visible. The walls now displayed digital stories of travelers who had once been silenced, a paraplegic veteran treated with honor, a young mother thanked instead of judged, a professor rerouted with empathy instead of suspicion. Their experiences, once erased, now anchored the new identity of air travel. Darius sat down and opened his tablet. A live stream was beginning when he had been asked to join but politely declined. The camera panned across a crowded auditorium where industry leaders, community activists, and airport executives gathered for the launch of the Langston Transit Equity Report. The host, a former news anchor turned advocate, stepped up. "What began with one incident," she said, "has become a movement. Because one man refused to accept the silence. Because one voice, calm but unyielding, asked a question that changed everything. Did you enforce the rule or enforce something else?" Applause on. Back at Langston HQ, Darius watched, eyes focused but distant. He knew he wasn't the hero in everyone's eyes. Some still saw him as overreacting, disruptive, too powerful. But those weren't the voices he listened to. He listened to the janitor who had thanked him quietly at Concord, to the teenage boy who said, "My dad got through the gate without a problem for the first time ever," to the flight attendant who whispered at LD7, "We were waiting for someone to do what you did." Those voices mattered. They were the real shareholders in justice. His assistant knocked softly and entered. "Media's requesting an official statement." Darius shook his head. "Not this time." "But they want to know what happens next." He stood and looked out over the city. "What happens next," he said, "is the system remembers what we made. It forget that respect isn't a favor, it's a right." In the weeks that followed, several changes cemented his legacy. Barrett, now barred from airline work, became a cautionary tale in training manuals titled "Bias in Uniform." LD equity monitors were adopted by 3 of the top 5 international carriers. And the FAA, under public pressure, issued a new directive on anti-discrimination compliance audits based directly on Langston Dynamics protocols. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion proposals, Darius received a handwritten note. It came from a father whose boarding had once been delayed under random screening. His words were simple: "Thank you. My son didn't miss his surgery this time." Darius placed the letter in the notebook beside "never again," because that was the point. Not domination, not punishment, restoration. He hadn't just canceled a flight. He'd rerouted the entire way the world moved through the sky, and he wasn't done. As he stepped into the elevator ready for the next round of negotiations, he took one last look at the digital screen above reception. It now read, "Welcome to LD7, where every passenger matters." And beneath it, a quote from Darius himself: "Gatekeepers should understand who built the gate." If this story moved you, share it. If you believe dignity should never come second to power, subscribe. And if you've ever been told you don't belong, let this story be your answer, because you do. Subscribe now. Stand for fairness. Today for change. https://www.youtube.com/watch you can mu landing link. Ken Tude, black CEO, denied boarding for oversized bag. 10 minutes later, he cancels the entire route.